the elections director for the Oregon Secretary of State's office. And we're going to be revisiting the section of the rules, which is covering what we do at the Secretary of State's office. So I'm going to ask Carol to provide our housekeeping updates for everyone, and then do some introductions, and then Anne will lead us through today's discussion.
Good morning, everyone. We are just going to give a quick reminder that as RAC members are speaking and utilizing the chat, members of the audience will not be able to see that because of our team settings. So we will be reading out loud anything that's put into our chat. And you can also find a recording of this RAC meeting on our website online, and as well as meeting materials by request. And we'll now go over introductions, and so I will pass it over to Kat to kick us off.
Hello, I'm Kat Schwartz. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm the voter registration integrity analyst with ODOT and DMV, and I'll pass to Tracy.
Good morning, Tracy Kravenko, Clatsop County Clerk, representing the Oregon Association of County Clerks. And I will pass it to Ulysses.
Hey, good morning, folks. My name is Ulysses. I'm a program coordinator here with the Innovation Law Lab. I use he, him pronouns, and I will pass it off to David.
Thanks. I'm David Becker. I'm the executive director and founder of the nonpartisan nonprofit Center for Election Innovation and Research. Should I pass it off to Michelle? Has she gone yet?
I did. I finally got in. Good morning. I'm Michelle Godin. I am a TSR1 out of Coos Bay. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also here to represent SEIU.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for being here. My name is Ann Burke-Jones. I use they, them pronouns. I'm the Elections Administration Manager at the Secretary of State's office here in Oregon. Very happy to have you all with us this morning as we jump into week 6 of the RAC on Oregon Motor Voter. So today, the plan is to review the Secretary of State's processing of the Oregon Motor Voter data and files. This is a recap of the information that we went over for the first time at our last meeting 2 weeks ago. And so we'll be going over mostly the same slides, trying to incorporate the feedback and questions that came up from RAC members a few weeks ago and seeing what else is kind of percolated in your minds. So as we work through these, please feel free to raise your hand, come off mute, offer feedback and questions, and we will go from there. So Carol, if you could bring up the slide deck.
Are you able to see the slides? I see it's presenting. No? Okay.
Not yet. There we go. And you can just advance through the first couple slides till we get to our OMV file processing. Okay, thank you. So again, as a reminder for everybody, we did go over this slide deck a few weeks ago. So we'll be taking it again, fairly high level. It's intended to promote conversation and to continue a conversation. So again, yeah, feel free to ask questions at any point in the process. So here, where we'll start with the receipt of the OMV data from DMV. The Secretary of State compares the files. They compare the issuance file and the data files transferred from DMV to the voter registration files that we have in Oregon's centralized voter registration system. So there's a comparison between DMV files and the active voter rolls. There's a couple things that happen at this stage. The first thing that happens is exclusion. So we do a matching process. And if during the matching process, The information from DMV is the same as an active voter registration. So the name, the date of birth, the address are all of the same. There will be no changes, no action taken on that record. So they're excluded from the rest of the OMV processing. Also, qualified individuals who have previously opted out of OMV are also filtered out of the process at this stage. It was brought up last week, or the last time we spoke, that we do want to make sure that the logic here for those qualified individuals who had previously opted out of OMV, that if they have been since registered via another method, so they're now an active registered voter, we do want to do that comparison with the DMV files to see if there's a change of address, but we wouldn't have to do an OMV mailer since they had previously opted out. So we'll be updating the logic of our system to ensure that those folks are given an opportunity to have their record updated if there's any change of address. So really they would be included in the registration update category, this next section of voters, where during the comparison, if we see that the information sent from DMV matches voters that are currently registered, whether they're active or inactive, then we will send those updates to county clerks to process to update those voter registration files. At this point, we also got some feedback previously that the clerks are very in favor of getting all updated signatures. Currently, the way that the process works is that for registration updates that are just a change of address, we are not getting, we are currently not requesting a signature from DMV. And so clerks are not getting an updated signature for those change of addresses. So that's going to be a recommended change that we for every interaction, every time there's a change to a record from DMV information, we would be requesting an updated signature from DMV. Any questions, any feedback, any concerns on this like initial matching period on this data?
Real quick, when for the top category, the folks who are excluded from OMV, no transaction, no registration as transaction is registered in the voter file, correct, at that point?
Yeah, that's correct. So currently
Okay.
they're not sent to the voter registration file if everything is matching.
Yeah, that's I'm thinking for instance, with Eric, one of the things it looks for is whether there is a new transaction that triggers a review or a sentence. So that would not be coded as any kind of new transaction at all within the voter file.
That's how it's currently set up. Yeah, there's nothing sent over, so there's no duplicate transaction marked or anything. There's nothing for the local election officials to process.
That's great. I think that's very good.
Okay. Anything else from RAC members before we move on? All right. Carol, we can move on. Thank you. So the Secretary of State does facilitate the mailing of an OMV notice to each qualified individual. We're proposing not later than the third business day after the receipt of the file from DMV that the Secretary of State will deliver the print-ready notice to a print vendor for processing. So again, just to cover the timeline for folks, after a transaction occurs at DMV, DMV has 5 days, 5 calendar days to make that information available for the Secretary of State to then retrieve. Once Secretary of State gets that information, within 3 business days, we will deliver a file to the print vendor for processing. And then the day after, next point, the date of maturation for the 21-day period outlined begins the day after the print vendor receives the notice file from the Secretary of State. Tracy, I see you have your hand up.
Thank you, Ant. After reviewing one of the meetings that I had missed, I had heard that Kat state that the DMV really is 2 business days, but they say 5 days because of the weekend or a holiday. And I would like it to also state business days the DMV has to get it to the SOS. It really makes a little easier timeline on the clerks when they have to try to figure out, okay, what day did you go in? 2 business days, not within 5 calendar days. So it's just a little clearer for us to figure it out.
Okay, great. Thank you for that feedback. So I'm putting in the notes that we'll clarify for that initial timeline that DMV should be transferring that data by the end of the 2nd business day. So then I would look toward Kat and see if there's any issues there that matches our current process. It would just be, I guess, a little bit of a change of language.
Yeah, I think the vast majority of the time that's how it works. There just are some exceptions like Thanksgiving and where it just will want to take that full 5 calendar days. And so I feel like it's more realistic to say that instead of business days. But I think we could, I'll check and see if there's any issue with that. I think we could say both of them, but I just think the more helpful timeline for you to have is the 5 business or 5 calendar days, just and being able to see that issuance date as your reference point, as opposed to trying to backtrack 2 calendar or 2 business days.
Tracy, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. When you say issuance date, Kat, what date are you referring to then?
I guess I'm not sure how it looks on your end, maybe especially through Eric, but you should be able to see the date of that the transaction went through and the date the person got issued their whatever credential it was. So maybe it might be changed. I'm not sure on the SOS side, like how it's filtered once it gets to clerks, but you should have that information available basically when it was processed on the DMV side.
Okay. Well, if you do need to make it the 5 calendar days, that's fine, but I wouldn't. And it's like we just need to be able to help somebody. For example, I had somebody last month kept checking in like every week. I went to DMV and when is my thing coming through? And I said, well, you need to wait so many days. She did. We still didn't have it. So I'm thinking, well, maybe she went in a different date or what, So it's just easier for us to figure out why they're not showing up when we expect them to show up in the file.
Yeah, thanks for that feedback. And that's really, Tracy, that's as we were kind of trying to look at these different timelines. The Secretary of State's office currently does not have a timeline that says when we deliver these files. So we wanted to put some rigor on ourselves and hold ourselves accountable and provide some more transparency for everyone involved here so that we could do the math and say that, okay, if this person comes in on a Monday, within 2 business days, by Wednesday night, the DMV should have that data available for the Secretary of State's office to pull. And then within 3 business days after we've gotten that, so that would be that next Monday at the latest. So within a week, we should be starting that 21-day maturation period, which I hear you and I completely agree that right now it's a bit ambiguous, which helps nobody. And so we need to have more rigor defining what these timeframes are so that we all kind of understand the process more and the timelines. So I really appreciate that feedback. Go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, actually, this is a lot better than what we had before. We would just say it's 21 days and it's like, okay, after 21 days, we're still waiting or they're still waiting. And that makes sense because we weren't aware of all the other days prior to that. So, and that it actually starts on the day that the vendor receives the file. So it does, it's just going to be a lot clearer for us processing. Thank you.
Thanks. And as we go through it, we're hoping that we will land on a very consistent date so that you could look back and say, oh, it turns out it's essentially 28 days for the whole process from the date of issuance to when the file would mature. So that is the intention, that we could get to a clearly defined time frame. Dina.
Thanks. One thing just comes up for me in thinking about this timeline is when we talk about whether it's 5 calendar days or 2 business days, for the DMV, the file is generated in the evening. For the SOS, we would issue the file to the print vendor during working hours. So I'd also like to clarify, like, you know, is it the close of business on the second business day for DMV? And is it the, you know, so just for us to determine what that looks like too. So that's the kind of ambiguity we're trying to get rid of, is we want to be crystal clear so that we know what the timeline is. So.
Yeah, thanks, Dina. Yeah, so data maturation, 21-day period outlined in statute begins the day after the print vendor will receive the notice file from the Secretary of State's office. I'll also take this opportunity to mention that I know that we've had some discussions about like trying to move that 21-day notice and where does that start. That is something that's outlined in statute, that a person cannot be added to the voter rolls until 21 days after the notice was issued. So that's very clear in statute that it's once the notice gets issued that 21-day clock starts. So that's why it's incorporated into the timeline as such, because again, having those clear timelines would be more beneficial for everybody. And so that's what we're trying to solve. So those notices will be sent by forwardable mail, including a pre-addressed postage paid return envelope. Notices will be mailed using the following mailing hierarchy that we'd be sending to the mailing address on file, if there is one, and then the residence address. And again, this is a change that I would highlight, that we are proposing that we would be sending these notices by forwardable mail. Currently, these OMV mailers are going out kind of this with the standard election mailing process where we send things as non-forwardable mail. That way, if there's a change of address, we know about it as election officials. This was brought up a couple weeks ago during the RAC discussion. And then I know we've also had some feedback from clerks that as we've teased out this undeliverable issue, it was suggested that if we just send these notices by forwardable mail, the whole point of these notices is to contact the voter, not to verify their address at this stage in time. So we would be following that recommendation to send those notices by forwardable mail to hopefully get to that voter as the primary goal. Any discussion, any concerns or feedback on this section? Okay, we will move on. So the notices, the OMV notice will include the following: an explanation of the Oregon motor voter process, a space for those OMV individuals to select a political party, a section for the OMV individuals to opt out if they choose. So we haven't really landed on this next section. We were considering whether we wanted to include categories or reasons for opting out, whether we just want to. Currently on the mailer, they just have a box to check that says I decline to register to vote through Oregon Motor Voter. So the question still remains, do we want to keep it that way, or do we want to provide additional reasons? And I know that there was some concerns expressed during our last meeting that if we have reasons, it could be potentially confusing for an individual who is looking at that card, which I think just tells us that we need to have a really good explanation of the process in that notice so that it is not confusing and we can make it very clear for that individual what their steps are for the different options available to them. We'll provide a signature line and then also multiple ways to return the mailer with instructions for those. So currently they just get returned by mail. So we would like to also provide additional options for them to return. Tracy.
Thank you. When you talked about giving clear reasons if they want to say I'm not qualified, I'm just thinking about, I've seen the letter and it is so wordy already. I mean, it is a full page, just stuffed full. And I think you're gonna, what do you call it? Word vomit on the voter that's looking at it. And, it might be too much. If we could shorten the letter, clarify a lot more, and just maybe, and then we could add the reasons for not being qualified.
Thank you for that feedback. I agree. It is pretty verbose right now. David, I see you have your hand up.
Does Oregon law require that reasons be collected or offered by voters when they decline?
It does not.
I mean, look, I don't think there's no reason to collect it. I think it would be interesting to know why people are choosing, but I also think it's such a self-selected sample that it's probably not going to be particularly viable as data. So my recommendation would be to remove it entirely. To Tracy's point, I think if it's not legally required, make it really clear that people can decline for any reason they want. It doesn't have to be a good reason. Just make it as simple as possible. The second point I'd like to raise is this is likely already being done, but I think keeping track of the data on when these notices go out, how many notices have gone out, how many voters respond to the notices, either with things like their selection of a party or declination, so that over time you could collect that data and review it, could be really helpful in assessing how well this process is working.
Yeah, thank you for that feedback. I would agree with you 100% that we need to be tracking this data. And we are tracking the responses and the breakdown of the different responses that we get, how many are returned undeliverable, how many are returned with party selections or opt-outs. So those are happening, but I agree we need to kind of formalize what that review process looks like, because right now we're just logging the information, and there's no formal process improvement or review of that. So yeah, I'll make a note here. Dina.
Thank you, and just to revisit, we do not currently ask for a person to self-identify as not qualified. This was one of the proposed ideas to be able to collect additional information when a person was, this is speaking directly to the DMV potential non-citizen registering voters, in an attempt to gather more data. The way that it was proposed and that we talked about at the last meeting was if a person did decline to register to vote and self-select, I'm not qualified to vote, then we talked about the SOS collecting that data and reporting it back to the DMV so that the DMV could take action on that record and review that record to say, oh, this person was not a citizen and was pulled into the automatic voter registration process. So I just wanted to provide that context, David, to see if there was, when we talked about it at the last meeting, the group was like, yeah, I guess it doesn't hurt to have that additional information. As long as we were doing something with it and there was value in the reason that we would be collecting it. So I just wanted to share that was some of the discussion that occurred. It would be a second opportunity to catch folks that were inadvertently pulled into the process, which is so rare. It is so rare that it is even occurring, but that was the discussion last time.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just throw out. I think it's very smart. I think with whatever data comes back from this, other than the data that is legally mandated, it's going to be highly self-selected, and so in general, I'd probably clean all of that off as much as possible unless it's legally required. And like you said, especially with the not qualified section, that's going to be a tiny percentage of a tiny percentage, right? It's going to be those who accidentally, for whatever reason, through whatever glitch, we're literally probably talking about dozens of people, like numbers like that, and then a smaller percentage of those who actually respond. So I think the more important thing would be to make sure that the language is really clear, that you can decline for any reason, and if you are not a qualified elector, you should decline.
Thank you for that. Yeah, and I think that's actually Ulysses. I see you have your hand up. Please jump in.
Yeah, I was just gonna say I'm totally on board with David there. I think the language about qualified voters should be totally clear. They should be very specific as to who is eligible and what consequences there are if you choose to, you know, incorrectly enroll. Um, but I'm also totally on board with him. I think that no reason should be required as to why you're declining to vote. Just, if you know you're not eligible, just say I'm declining, and I think that should be at the end of it. I don't believe that sort of information should be collected. I think for confidentiality reasons, privacy reasons as well. I don't like having to have folks say, I'm ineligible. I think there can be some risks there, and I think David's right on the money with his points.
Thank you, everybody, for chiming in there. And yeah, I would also echo that, like, currently there's no notification for individuals, and so this is, I would say, us trying to thread that balance between finding the appropriate level and then overcorrecting and communicating too much. So really appreciate the feedback from everybody. Like Dina said, at this stage, the intention is that they should already have been presented an opportunity. Well, they should also already have been informed that their information is being sent for voter registration purposes. So that would be a change from the current process. So currently they're not getting any notification. So they should get some sort of notification at DMV that they're being registered. And then the other piece that I'm hearing is that the OMB mailer needs to specifically list what the qualifications are for voting and what the consequences could be for registering when you're not qualified. That does not currently exist in the OMB mailer. So yeah, we'll make a note to make sure that that is included. Anything else on this piece? On the contents of the notice? Okay. We can move on to the next slide. So return notices. Once these notices are returned to the Secretary of State's office, we're going to start with this first category, which is within the first 21-day period. So before those records have matured, once they reach maturation, they get sent to the county clerk's office. So this is in that first 21-day period. If those cards are returned to us as undeliverable, the Secretary of State will flag that card as undeliverable in the OMV system, and the record will be excluded from the file sent to counties. Now, again, to explain that a little more, they would be excluded because if that notice came back undeliverable, they did not get that opportunity to opt out of the process. So because they didn't get the opportunity to opt out because that notice had been undeliverable, then we will exclude them from the rest of the process. The counties won't get their information. If they return that card early with a party selection, then the day that we receive that card with a party selection, that becomes a completed voter registration file, completed voter registration record, and we will send that to the appropriate county for processing. And their date of registration would be the day that we receive that card back with the party selection. Okay, we can go to the next slide, Carol. So we're still talking about these cards returned within that 21-day period. So we have opt-out reason on here. So this slide deck was put to inform the conversation. So as we're thinking through it, if we had an opt-out reason, then we would be tracking that information. It sounds like the recommendation is that we are not offering or asking for a particular reason that they would be declining. But either way, the record, once they're returned with an opt-out within that 21-day period, then we mark that record. The Secretary of State enters that information in our OMV system, which is that matching software. We mark them as opted out. We do not pass that information along to the county election officials for registration. And then in the OMV system, that uses it for future issuances. So the next time they come into DMV for a covered transaction, and they would be included in the OMV system. Once that data gets in here, we'd look at it. We'd see that they had previously opted out, so that they would be opted out again. We would exclude them from future mailings. Michelle.
So I have a question in a scenario. So say somebody comes in, their original issuance for an ID card shows an N, which is not confirmed as a citizen. So it doesn't go through the OMV process. Later they come in with their permanent resident card, and now we're changing that to a P. Does that put them into the OMV system now that we've changed the status, or are they still going to have to manually select to be able to vote, or say a C? I should say C, not P, but
Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's where you lost me. I'm like, well, if they're
sorry.
a P, we
No,
shouldn't
I
be
was-
getting
I'm
that
sorry.
information.
I apologize. I should say C. So if they come in with like their birth abroad and now they have a C on record, is that now going to automatically put them back into the motor voter, or because they've already been skipped once for issuance because it was an N before, because maybe they only had their out-of-state license to get issued?
Okay, I think I'm following you. So if they were N previously, they should not have been included in previous OMV issuances. So
Right.
This scenario would be somebody that already has proven citizenship. They've
Okay.
already been included, right?
Already been included and they declined.
They've
and
opted
now-
out.
Okay.
Now,
Okay.
6 years, 8 years later or something, they're coming back in.
Mhm.
You at the DMV, you don't know whether this person is registered to vote. So
Right.
you're just determining qualifications.
Mhm.
Say you do, you determine that they meet all the qualifications, you send them over in the OMV file. During our matching, if we have seen that we have sent a previous card that they have opted out of, then we will consider that opt-out still binding.
Okay.
Now,
So,
to throw
okay.
that other scenario out there, if they had, in the meantime, so they've opted out, say 8 years ago, and then they filled out a paper registration card or went online and registered to vote in the last 2 years, we want to still look at that file. We want to see that opt-out happened in 2018 or something, but then they had registered to vote in 2020. So that says that they wanted to be included. So we do want to look at that file to see if we need to send an address change or an update to the counties in those instances.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just trying to wrap my head around all of the different possible scenarios, I guess, of how this can be combined and how that flows through.
Can I add something?
Yeah, please, Tracy.
I think what she's, if I understand her correctly, that they were not able to prove their legal presence, citizenship, the first time they came in, and then they came back 4 or 5 years later, and now they want to do that. So first time they didn't come over in the OMB process because they would have been excluded because they didn't meet any qualifications to come over. But then when they come and that thing changes to a C, yes, I believe it does come into us because that's where we're getting our legacy issues. So they are coming over once they meet those requirements, from what I understand. Kat, do you have any more clarification on that one?
Yeah, I think so. The process flows one way in pretty much all cases, except when maybe we're working on a specific record or something, but it goes from DMV to Secretary of State. And so we aren't receiving any information about people opting out or anything like that. We're letting Secretary of State do that filtering. So yes, someone who didn't meet qualifications, they wouldn't have gone over in that file. even if they come back many years later and they establish that seat, even if they're a very old customer, that would be the first time they come into the OMV file. So this will be their first opportunity to opt out in the first place. And so what's being described on the screen doesn't really, this is a separate situation from that one we're describing, yeah, because this is for somebody who has gone over an OMV before and has opted out perhaps many years ago.
I apologize for going off track. Sorry.
No need to apologize. Like that's what we're here for, is to try to talk through these different scenarios and details. So yeah, it's very much appreciated. All right, we can move on to the next slide here. So some other scenarios that we have yet to firmly define how we want to treat them. Return notices that come back, again, within that 21-day period before that record is considered matured, that are incomplete. By incomplete, it could be missing a party selection, it could be missing a signature, illegible notices, conflicting information. So a voter checks the box to decline, but also selects a party, or they select multiple parties, or they include some sort of unsolicited information, like an address update. So currently, in almost all of these scenarios, we're sending a letter back to the voter asking them to clarify or provide the missing information. But very curious about the feedback for how we should be treating these. So Tracy, I see you have your hand up.
Yes. Just looking at when you said multiple parties selected, we get that quite often on just voter registration cards. And if I'm correct in stating, the current process is if they were previously registered, we leave them where they were. And that way they get a notification card and it says the party, and they can contact us if it's incorrect. Multiple parties, yes, we can send a letter to them ourselves. I don't know that the state should be doing that. I think it's more of a county function, but that would be one less thing we would have to do. But we do it anyway when people check multiple parties, so it's a common practice for us.
David?
Yeah, so one of the things I've seen in other states, and I have a question about how Oregon does it, is whether Oregon collects, stores, and protects alternative contact methods like cell phone numbers and email addresses. And especially, there's a really good reason to be engaging with voters by mail in Oregon, obviously, because the ballots are going back and forth by mail. But in this circumstance, you have a question about something you've received, and it might be helpful to get rapid clarification of that, and whether or not there's an opportunity to allow for opt-ins of voters or opt-outs or something like that, so that election officials at the state and the county level might be able to more instantly communicate with voters. This is a broader question, obviously, as well, but it's just something. I just wanted to see how Oregon does it.
Yeah, that's a great question. So currently, voters can provide that additional information. And if they provide a phone number or an email address, I believe that it is available in the public voter lists that are produced and provided by the counties and the state. So if the voter does provide that, county officials can enter that into their voter registration record, and then it would be included in those lists. At this stage of the process, though, because typically these would be for folks that are not currently registered. So these are just those that are coming through the OMV process. So we've just got information that's come from DMV, no voter registration file information. So at this point, we would not have any additional contact information for these folks. It would just be the information that came over from DMV. And so I don't believe we would have any sort of phone number or email address that would be collected.
But DMV might, correct?
It's a good question for DMV.
And before you go, I'm not trying to. This is a bigger issue that encompasses a lot of things that are currently, in my conversation with election officials, really at the cutting edge of what election officials are dealing with. Because obviously, having the ability to communicate quickly and accurately with their voters is really important. And I've seen data from states that, and I use the term collect, store, and protect. And that's really important because it's states that protect that data from public disclosure as part of the public list, because you want to incentivize people to give it to you and not have it be part of the public list. But then also, there's data from some states that do that they're getting higher rates of responses. So for instance, a mailing notice might go out, but then have a QR code on it or an email address or a website on it that people go to, and they're getting much higher quality and quicker data responses. So I just raise that in general. This is not something that it's not wrong if there's a lot of mail, because Oregon obviously has good reason to have multiple mail contacts with its voters. And that's one of the things that's led Oregon to have such high quality, accurate voter lists. So I'm not trying to change that in any way.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. So I guess I would also kind of pass the question on to Kat and Michelle. Do you collect contact information from those individuals when they're coming in for credentials?
I know that it's inconsistent. Michelle can probably give more details, but I know that we don't necessarily require it, but we do have it for some folks. I think more often phone number, but not sure. Yeah.
So we have a couple of different ways that we gather alternative contact information, whether that's emails and or phone numbers. One of it is actually a law that just passed where we can add an emergency contact phone number for them as well as for their vehicles. So if they're in a motor vehicle accident, there's an emergency contact phone number, which is not theirs necessarily, but others with names. And then when they're making an appointment, they would put in an email and or phone number for that purpose for themselves. But sometimes that is not verified, because sometimes it's the mom doing it for the child, or a child is doing it for their elderly their parent or their grandparent, or a neighbor's doing it. So it's definitely not verified information that I would want to attach to somebody's record. That's my thoughts.
Yeah, thanks for that context. Dina?
Thank you. As I'm thinking this through, just thinking through it like administratively, if we are sending a 21-day notice and in that notice we make a space for contact information, which we do not currently collect. We also don't have a place to store that data in our OMV system, which is the system that we're talking about right now. But in the event that we said, let's include a line on the OMV opt-out mailer for contact information, in the event that one of these scenarios appeared, we would be able to correspond with that person using that method. So we could reach out to them to say, hey, you checked the box that said you want to decline to register to vote and you selected a party. Can you confirm which one you wanted? And so there's that piece that is making sense to me. 21 days is short, especially considering when we're talking about starting the 21-day period is the day after the print vendor gets the file. And that is, not always the day that the print vendor is getting that mailing in the mail, but hopefully most commonly that is. So if they receive it, it takes a couple of days for them to get it. They open it right away. They respond to it right away, and they return it right away. We're still getting it back very close to that 21-day period, which means if we needed to respond to them via email, or I'm sorry, if via mail, it's likely, this will really go on for quite a while. So I like the idea of obtaining and asking for them to provide contact information as an option in the event that we need to reach out to them. So I just wanted to pose that question to the group to see what we thought. And then also, and maybe it's on the next slide here, but when these odd notices or these edge cases come back, what happens with them? do we pull them out of the file that goes to the counties? No,
Yeah, that's a really good question. And yeah, that would probably be helpful for everybody to understand. So that 21-day clock is ticking. So that's probably the first thing to understand. That 21-day clock ticks. Once that 21-day period reaches maturity, then those records would be sent to county clerks to process for voter registration as non-affiliated voters. So during this 21-day period, we're kind of working against that clock, right? We're trying to offer the voter the opportunity to complete the opt-out if that's what they're trying to do before that 21-day period. In almost all of these situations, we're not doing anything with the record at the time. We're reaching out to the voter to get the incomplete information or to provide clarity. But until we get that full, complete response from them, their record is still wherever it was in that 21-day maturation period. And typically, because of how long it takes to go back and forth with these folks, the record probably meets that 21-day period and reaches maturation and is sent to the counties to process while we're still going back and forth on the previous notice that they had sent that was insufficient for some reason. Does that help answer that question, Dina? Okay.
Yeah, that's incredibly helpful. And I think that helps put this into context. Like, well, okay, what if a voter does that receives this mailer checks the box of I don't want to be registered and here's my party. They are getting, if they don't clear that up before the 21-day maturation period, they are being registered to vote. So if they meant that they wanted to decline, that didn't occur. So I'd be curious from the group, like what would does it make sense to treat these all the same, each of these scenarios the same, and that we just attempt to resolve them and then they just flow to counties? Or for the folks that check multiple boxes, I want to decline and here's my party affiliation, should those folks be treated differently? And should we pull them out of the process and respond to them differently? It doesn't have to be one size fits all. We have the, we have the opportunity to discuss these and determine whether we want to treat any of them differently, or if we want to treat the whole group differently and pull them out of AVR until their issues are resolved with these mailers.
Yeah, and I actually, I wanted to go back to Tracy, because Tracy, you had mentioned, I think you were thinking out loud of whether this should be a state process or a county process. And I think that's very relevant discussion to have. And to Dina's point, I feel like we're going to end up with different categories, different buckets of these individuals. So I would be curious from your perspective and from the clerks, how do you want us to treat these? Like if somebody's returning a mailer and they select two parties, do you want us to just send them on to you as a completed card and let you handle the rest of because it seems like they wanted to register to vote. There was some conflicting information. So yeah, please, if you could speak to that a little.
Because you'll have to, we get some that don't have any party listed sometimes. It doesn't come over non-affiliated. There's just no party. But my concern is if you guys deal with it going back and forth, you're postponing their opportunity to vote if we've got an election coming up very shortly after that time. And we can deal with that a little easier. Like I said, we do it all the time when people check multiple parties or they check non-affiliated and a party. And there's different ways, the office procedures, the way different offices handle it. But my concern is, yes, if the registration date ends up being later because of that, because we can tell when their signature date is. So to us, the signature date means when they were in the DMV, and then the registration date sometimes is different because that's when they provide the information back to the state. And that's one thing that is very confusing because the signature date, we don't do anything with that, and it doesn't come over as anything once we populate our data. you only notice it is if you scroll down far enough in the bottom of the screen and see signature date was at a different date. I was just looking at a record currently and found one just like that, a brand new voter, non-affiliated, registration for 10/18, that their signature date was back on 9/23, which is about the 20-day area, which is fine. But it's going to populate as registered on the 10, where'd that screen go? The 10/18. And to me, that's not correct. It should be when they had made the transaction at DMV. And I'm not sure, am I thinking of that incorrectly? Or do we just need to clarify that information a little clearer to clerks and the voters? Does that make sense?
Yeah,
That
it
probably
does
went a
make
little bit off
sense.
topic, but
Yeah, no, it does make sense. I was following you. It sounds like you were advocating for the effective date to be the date, the issuance date, the date they actually appeared at DMV.
oh, that would be the impression I would get when if I was at the DMV and they told me this is being shared with voter registration, I'd be going, okay, as of today.
Yeah, that's a tricky piece because we run up against the statute that says they can't be added to the voter rolls until
Right.
21 days after the notice is issued. Maybe
And
there's
if-
some wiggle room on what we consider the effective date of registration, even though they're
And
not
it's-
added.
Yeah, and is that the whole process? If they do send it in early, does it get pushed early? Like if they return it right away, you get it back in say 5 days. They provided the party, you check the party. Does it sit there and wait for the next 20 days or 15
So-
days?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So no, we don't sit on those records. So if they had returned a card to us, and I think this ties into some of the potential complexities if we were to determine that we could backdate that effective date of registration, is yes, if an individual returns the card to us with a party selection the 5th day after that notice was issued, the day that we receive it as the Secretary of State's office is the day of their effective registration date. So we would process that information and send it to clerks the day we receive it. And that would be the registration date.
So as a person new to the state coming in, getting a license, that would not make any sense to me because I'm being told at the DMV. Just a statement there that just came to me about that one. But as far as letting the counties do the verification of party, I think that is best. Yes, taking care of ones when they don't sign. Let's say they decline and they don't sign. I would not push that one through. I would wait and you guys get a signature from them before it goes through, even if it's after the 21 days, because they've made an attempt to say something. It's just if they've declined, I wouldn't, even with or without a signature, I wouldn't want to add them to the rolls. They turn around and they decide to, then fine. But yeah.
I really appreciate that extra distinction. That's the first time we've heard that direct suggestion. Michelle, I see you have your hand up.
So back to the 21-day registration thing, my thoughts went to that notice that we're supposed to be giving them at the DMV. So it should say that 21 days from now is when you are being registered to vote, not today in that flyer?
So to answer your question, yes, we need to provide clarity on when that registration would occur, because one of the specific issues that we're trying to address are the timelines and the delay in them being processing, specifically around like a voter registration deadline. And so, yeah, we need to inform voters that if they're appearing at DMV 3 days before voter registration deadline, OMV will not register them in time to meet that deadline. And so they need to be proactive and do another step to register before that deadline if they would like to participate in the upcoming election. So that is absolutely one of those things that we're trying to address, especially ahead of the primary election this next year.
Yeah, and something that's helpful that I know DMV sometimes says to people is automatic voter registration is automatic but not immediate. It just means that the customer isn't putting in extra work to register.
Dina?
Thank you. I just wanted to add that's perfect to take us back to some of the earlier discussions we had where the E-30 or like the election registration deadline, 30 days before that is when we talked about in previous sessions of driving voters to EDVR just to be safe. And the whole reason that has come up is because we're trying to pin down that 21 days isn't 21 days. And even as we've been talking, I'm working on like a sample timeline. And I mean, it's a month. It's 30 days. I mean, really, by the time we get the data from the DMV, we do all of the matching data, get the file to the vendor gets the card in the mail, that starts the 21-day clock. It's a month. So it takes 30 days. So we need to make sure that 30 days before the deadline to register to vote for every scheduled election, we're taking some sort of proactive action. So I really appreciate the discussion because what continues to be highlighted is that it's confusing and the 21-day waiting period is an ORS. So we're not going to change that through this RAC, but we certainly can put some guardrails in place that help. So really, really appreciate everyone's this conversation.
Tracy, go ahead.
Thank you. I wanted to give an example is during the last general election, they must have been stating at the DMV that you will be automatically registered because they turn around and show up at our window and say, they just told me I was automatically registered, so now I want to vote. And it's like, doesn't work that way. And so, it makes for a very awkward conversation at the counter when your counter is already full.
Yeah, Michelle?
So I just want to kind of respond to that. At the last general election, we weren't stating anything to anybody. There was assumptions that were happening from voters that once they came in, they were automatic and the immediate. That's where the conversation of it is automatic, but it is not an immediate. That's where that started, was because of that assumption. But with us now needing to be more proactive in having a conversation at the DMV counters, we need to make sure that we know what that timeline is, because there will be questions, and we have now, once we start that conversation, we have to become experts, because there will be too many questions for us and too many unanswered questions. We'll try to send everybody to Secretary of State, right, for those answers, but most people want that answer right now before they finish the transaction. I'll step back.
Yeah, David?
Yeah, I think this is a really useful and helpful conversation because honestly, rather than kind of swimming upstream against voters and citizens' expectations, we should be swimming alongstream with them. There are, it's a simple fact of life. It's unfortunate for departments of motor vehicles, but that is where most people have contact with the state when they experience a life event, when they come of age, when they change their address, when they change their name. That was not why DMVs were created. I have a complete empathy and sympathy for how DMV's roles have expanded greatly. But the simple fact of the matter is that is how most citizens expect to interact with government. And similarly, when they hear things like you're going to be automatically registered, automatic equals immediate in their minds. We know that. I would suggest further, it's not wrong for them to expect, to the degree possible, one-stop shopping and getting all the answers at once. That's how we expect to be dealt with when we're dealing with businesses and others online, especially nowadays with our devices and everything else. And so it's really helpful what everyone has said so far has been so good, because it is it is an appreciation of that and a kind of review of how we go about these things to meet voters and citizens where they are. So it's not crazy if someone comes in, a month before an election and they're told they're going to be automatically registered, for them to naturally think they're going to be able to vote in the next election in Oregon. And honestly, I think from all our perspectives, we think that's great. I mean, if people are coming in to Oregon and meeting the eligibility requirements for voting in the next election, most states are lucky if they have, in a midterm election, 45% of their eligible voters voting. So thinking through this in exactly this way from the voter's perspective, when they walk into a DMV, how they're going to interact and what their reasonable expectations are and how we can address them, I think is incredibly important. So thanks to everyone for engaging in that.
Yeah, thank you, David, for saying that. And I think just to sum up, I think that we all agree that the current information being presented to voters is insufficient across the board. Like everybody kind of agrees with that the voters are not getting clear communication currently. And so that's what we're trying to address. And it feels like it needs to be a multi-prong approach. The Secretary of State needs to provide good information in those handouts, and through the design of the system, DMV needs to understand kind of their responsibilities and how they can assist. And then also the clerks need to be on the exact same page because they're the other public facing. They're going to get the downstream effects. And so they need to be in like all three of us need to be in lockstep with our communications to voters. So I feel like we're going to get there eventually due to conversations like this. So I really appreciate that. On this current slide, so as far as these returned notices that are coming back to the Secretary of State that are insufficient for some way, what I'm hearing is that we don't maybe see a lot of value in the Secretary of State's office trying to go back and forth with voters necessarily during this period. I'm seeing Tracy shake her head because I'm trying to is that correct? Is that a correct way to summarize that? That if someone's trying to decline, it sounds like we should try to meet them where they're at, or if if it looks like they're trying to register to vote, then we should pass them through to the counties. Is that a safe summary, Tracy?
Yes, that's it. If the decline box isn't checked or marked in any way, then let the clerks deal with it as it comes through. I mean, and that may include having to send us a copy of the form that they've returned. I know a lot of times if they have taken care of their issue, we don't see the forms. It's only when they come late. But that may have to be part of the process as well.
Okay. I appreciate that. And yeah, we can change our process to fit whatever the system design should be. So if it's one of those things where we just need to scan in that card and pass it along to the clerks, then yeah, we can build that into our system. Michelle?
This probably is for the slide before this, but as an option, would it be okay to have a QR code or something where they can actually just finish filling it out online and just get that? Because I'm trying to think of younger voters, right? They're not going to fax, they're not going to email, and they're not going to regular mail it. They're way more into QR code, just fill it out real quick and press submit, and Adobe Sign or whatever to get that signature to you guys as an option. And then having the ability for them to enter in, their phone number, their cell phone number, and or an email. So that way, if there were any further communications needed, everybody had that. And that's how they would assume that they would get response, not just through the regular postal mail.
Yeah. So again, currently the only response is through mail. So we know that is outdated and insufficient. So yes, we do want to explore multiple ways for a voter to respond, and including a QR code for some sort of online or emailed submission is absolutely on the roadmap. All right, so I think we can move on to the next slide here. So this is just describing what happens when the Secretary of State's office receives information from the voters after the 21-day period. So again, at the 21-day maturation of these records, any of the outstanding cards would be compiled as completed voter registration cards and sent to the county clerks for registration. If we receive an undeliverable notice after that 21-day period, our office scans that in and sends it along to the county clerk as a cancellation request for their voter registration.
Correction, that would be an inactive.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, undeliverable notices would be scanned in for inactive. If they had declined to vote, saying they wanted to opt out of the process, those would be transferred over as a cancellation request. And then a party selection card that came late would be the same way, would be transferred on as an update to that registration, because all of those folks should have been processed as new voters by the clerks by this point in time. I don't think that there would need to be any changes to this, but I did want to pause to see if anybody has feedback on it. Okay. Kat, go ahead.
This is not about this slide in particular, but Michelle's comment made me have another question about the privacy of someone's response via the mailer. And I've never physically seen it. I've seen online copies. So are they able to like enclose their answers so someone couldn't see their party selected, for example, if once it's getting delivered back to SOS?
So it is, we do provide a return envelope for them to put that envelope in. So it's not like a postcard or anything that anybody would have visibility into that mail piece.
Gotcha. Thanks.
Okay, we can move on to the next slide. So this is kind of shifting the focus a little bit and more talking about then what happens to the files on the county side. So once that 21-day maturation period has happened, then the Secretary of State takes that data, compiles them into voter registration cards, and transfers them to the local election officials, to the county clerk, through the OCVR, through our Oregon Centralized Voter Registration System. The clerks then have a queue of Oregon motor voter registration cards that they process according to state law. They also process those opt-out notices that are received after the 21 days, as mentioned in the previous slide, and those party selection notices received after the date and undeliverable notices. So basically, after the 21 days, any information the state gets, pass it right along to the county to actually process that information and update those records. Any questions on this piece? All right, so we'll just go to this next slide here, which is just being very clear and calling out that, kind of like DMV was describing, that automatic voter registration is automatic but not immediate. Automatic voter registration is automatic, but it's not without human intervention. So we send the cards, we process the cards, we get them all together automatically and send them to the county clerks automatically. But the clerks do not process these cards automatically. There is an individual that sits and looks at each card and processes them and accepts them. So we're just trying to make this clear that the registration cards still need to be legible, accurate, and complete, just like all other registration activities that occur in the state. So clerks still get the chance to review that final card, and they can reject the transaction if something is insufficient. It's not processed and added to the rolls automatically. And then I think the next slide is mostly a repeat of those, the county processing after 21 days. So let's go to the next one, where we're talking a little bit about, okay, so we have all this data transferring back and forth. What happens if something's wrong? And so we have, in the last few months, kind of built out these processes, working between agencies, DMV and the Secretary of State's office have adopted some joint procedures in place for escalating, tracking, and reporting errors related to the Oregon motor voter process. One of the pieces that we've started to build out is the method for the counties to notify Secretary of State of any potential issues with OMV data. So we had a little bit of an informal process for this. We've formalized it. So county users, if they see anything questionable related to Oregon motor voter data, they escalate that to the Secretary of State's office, provide the data that they have questions about, and then the Secretary of State's office will send that inquiry on to the DMV. And to put a little bit of a finer note, we do have specific individuals in both offices. So we'll have an AVR policy specialist, an automatic voter registration policy specialist in our office that handles that information and then transfers it over to Kat at ODOT, who's the voter registration integrity analyst with ODOT. So role-specific responsibilities there. Tracy.
Thank you. When you say issues with OMB data, can I give an example?
Please.
We have a new voter come through, and of course we have to verify the DMV number. But there's a box that we have to check, and it checks with DMV if the DMV number is correct for that person, and they're eligible, I guess. I'm not sure what exactly it all checks. However, we do get some that'll sit there for months and it will never check. And they came through the OMV process. Are those the kind of voters you guys want to see at the Secretary of State's level? Because otherwise they just sit there and unless they vote in a federal election, there's no, I mean, they're treated as a HAVA voter because we don't have verification of citizenship, I mean, of the presence that they need to meet for the federal elections.
Yeah. So thanks, Tracy, for your question. So first off, yes, absolutely. That is a great example of individuals that we would like to get that information so that we can investigate a little more, because that verification button that you mentioned is checking. It's doing essentially, it's doing a check on that DMV issue, a credential. So it's looking at that driver's license number and saying, is this valid? Is this a valid number for this individual? And if for some reason that's not validating on information that DMV has sent to us, then we would want to investigate that.
And validating means they meet all criteria for voting, and they should have had the citizen, the C or whatever they've met, legal presence, citizenship for voting, correct?
Correct. Yeah, it would be the HAVA file that we've received from DMV, which is valid credentials for citizens in the state. One of the things, and Kat might be a better person to chime in on the details of this, but like one of the, like some scenarios why a record wouldn't validate for you is if an individual then moves to another state, that record gets pulled out of the Oregon DMV file and it would not appear as an active one in that HAVA file on that DMV verification screen. So that's one reason they might be moved. That credential might also become invalid for some particular reason, which you as the local election official, you can't see that reason, but we can escalate it and we can get that information for you from DMV.
And sometimes they're confidential, but again, we can't see that information.
Yeah, and I would say it's not unusual because it's a file that we send to Secretary of State once a week, that it would take about a week for it to verify if it's a brand new person. And that would make sense, but hopefully not months. So definitely escalate those so we can look into them.
Yeah, usually they're within a week. So I can go back and check the previous week and be just fine. But yeah, we've got some that are, a few months old or more than a few weeks, that just won't verify. And yeah, that's a very common thing that we find.
Yeah, and I will add that as part of the discussions around improving the OMV system, we, as in the Secretary of State and ODOT, have had lots of conversations about how we can increase the frequency there on that one file transfer, because currently there is about a week waiting period, and so we're exploring opportunities to shorten that time frame to get more frequent data transfers.
Well, it would make sense based on the DMV needing the 5 days to vet the information. So, I mean, it goes along with that. Is that correct, Kat? That's kind of almost the same reason. I mean, you can't send us a number on something that you haven't had opportunity to vet as a meeting the
Yeah,
requirements.
They're slightly different because the file that we send is more of a big snapshot of the current system so that you can use it to update your voter rolls. So it could just be address changes and things like that that are different, and it's not necessarily connected to the OMV process because it's just a much bigger group of voters. But yeah, I don't think there's any reason why we send it once a week. I think we could do it more frequently just to keep it more timely.
Thank you.
Okay, other topics that we had on here were what to do with notification from a voter that they are not qualified, if that's during the opt-out period or after the maturation deadline. Currently, the way that we would handle these, if we get some sort of notice that a county is questioning whether a record was received accurately and the individual was qualified, they can pass it up to our office. We'll send it along to DMV to revalidate those qualifications. And if they were not qualified for some reason, then that would be reported as an error because they should not have been included in the OMV process. So we're building out those structures a little bit, building that communication framework. Notification from a voter that they had opted out of OMV in the past. I'm assuming this question would be like those voters speaking with a county clerk or something. Why am I registered? I've tried to opt out of this in the past. These would all be scenarios where our office would like more information. We would like to get reported so that we could investigate. Were they not logged in the OMV system appropriately for their opt-out? Did we miss a step? Why were they included? So this is just another one of those scenarios, potential scenarios that we could use that extra notification so that we can look into the system to see if there's anything that we missed. Discuss methods for the Secretary of State to notify, I imagine this would be DMV of issues on OMV data. So we have, as I said, we've built out these communication channels. So anytime that our office is getting information from counties or from voters directly that something might be off with this data, then we would reach out to DMV directly to get them to investigate, to validate those credentials. I'm trying to think if there were any questions, any other feedback or things that pop up in folks' mind on this. So I guess the last one, discussing the method of tracking and reporting OMV errors. This has really been a joint effort between DMV and the Secretary of State's office, where we are each, I would say, we are each independently tracking these errors and then on a regular basis coordinating to make sure that we're within alignment and we're aware of all the data to make sure that these line up correctly. Michelle, go ahead and jump in.
So I had a question about like an individual voter giving notification of not qualified or opting out in a previous one. Is there any more conversation once you figured out the reason why to go back to the voter to let them know that that has been addressed for whatever you know what I mean?
Yeah, sure. Do we follow up with the
Right.
individual
So
that
like
was
they come
affected?
and they're like, hey, I opted out before. I don't know why you guys are doing this. And you're like, thank you for your information. Then we go back to DMV or the OMV. We figure it out, we fix it. But is there any communication back to the voter to let them know that that wasn't falling on deaf ears?
Okay, yeah, thank you for that clarification. And I would say that in general, yes, I would answer that. Most of the time, those conversations would be kind of coming through the county clerk's offices. And so we would assume that the clerk would be following up directly with their voter once we were able to confirm what took place at the Secretary of State's office. Kind of building on that a little bit more as far as like for those that have been reported as errors, for those individuals that were registered through no fault of their own because DMV made a mistake on data entry or something. We have followed up with all of those voters individually and sent them letters to explain what happened and to issue essentially a no fault letter. You were included in the system through no fault of your own. Here's your documentation. So yes, we have done that with each individual that has been affected. Any other topics? We can go ahead and advance to the next slide, Carol, which is the last slide in this presentation. So we have completed the content for today. We do still have some time, so if there's anything else, any other questions or feedback that came up during today's discussion or from previous weeks, we can talk about that now. Just kind of looking forward a little bit. Next week, we have another week set aside to this topic, to the Secretary of State processing OMB records. And then the following week in November, we'll start actually presenting the drafted rules for feedback and questions. So that's kind of looking forward the next couple weeks, but just wanted to open it up for RAC members if they have anything else that they'd like to bring up today. Kat.
This is also just another kind of random thing that popped into my head. For voter registration cards, so we offer those at paper cards at DMV, especially if we're getting close to an election, and we know, that conversation about people thinking they might be automatically registered. So we have some communication up about that and have those paper cards ready. I thought I was looking at one the other day and I thought it required postage. Is that true, or was that an old one?
Yeah, so I think that the paper registration cards do require postage if they're being mailed for the current design.
Okay,
It's
because I just thought, yeah, that might be a little, that just one more barrier for people to not do it quickly.
Well, we were clerks are under the assumption if they're filling them out at the DMV that they're giving them to one of the counter workers to turn around and they send them to us once a week, or as it gets closer we can go get them. I know some bigger counties actually make trips out to DMVs on registration day after registration deadline to collect as many of the paper ones that were filled out and turned in. But that's what we thought people were doing with the cards, but of course we do know they take them, and yes, they do require postage.
Yeah, that's a great distinction, Tracy. I appreciate you bringing that up. That again, DMV is an NVRA designated voter registration agency. So if a voter turns in a completed paper card to DMV, it is effective the day it's turned in, and then DMV will transfer it to their local election officials. Michelle, you have your hand up.
Yeah, I was just going to reiterate that. We always give them the option to hand it back into us, and then we send it forward to our county elections. For the ones that are on the border, though, between counties where maybe it's could be going to multiple, sometimes they're like, oh, I'll just do it myself. So again, they would end up having to pay postage.
Go ahead, Tracy.
To go on that, Michelle, I would just encourage them to turn it in anyway. And you can send it all to one county. It's effective when you guys accept it, not when we receive it, the paper copies. So it does not matter which county department and which county office it goes to. We all are always forwarding stuff to one another. So it is not an issue when it comes to which county, and they don't know which county. just send them to your local one.
Yeah, I mean, anything that gets dropped off to us, yes, but I definitely have had conversation with customers and voters that are like, I'll just do it myself. And then they might turn it into a DMV in their local area. I think it's their fear that it's going to get lost in the shuffle. It really is. It's some people don't trust the post office, some people don't trust the DMV, some people don't trust, we got people that are distrusting. So
I don't trust
I don't
elections
argue
either.
with them. So I just go, here, this is an option for you. And I don't turn it into a big conversation if I don't have to. But to Kat's point, yeah, it is a potential barrier if they feel like they have to mail it in, if they have to pay postage.
All right. Any more discussion? Any other topics? Okay, well, with that, I believe we'll wrap up for the week. I want to thank all the RAC members again for their participation, really helping us provide that extra context and information that we need to improve this process. So it's greatly appreciated. We'll look forward to rejoining next week. Thanks, everybody.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.